You'll forgive me as I load the presentation. A lot of the discussion at PJM, by the way, my name is Jeff Bladen, I'm with PJM. A lot of the discussion at PJM is always around markets and prices and the economics and supply and demand, and so I end up spending a lot of time in rooms with economists, and so I was told a funny story recently about two economists who were on an airplane flying to Chicago for a conference they were both presenting a paper at, and one was sitting in the aisle, one was sitting in the window seat, and there was someone between them, and they were having a nice conversation about the various merits of both papers they were about to deliver, and about 20 minutes into the flight, the gentleman who was sitting between them said, "Would you mind if I switch seats with one of you? I'm actually trying to get a nap on the way to Chicago." And they said, "Fine, no problem." And a couple minutes after they traded seats, the one economist turned to the other and said, "You know, I think that's the very first time someone's ever said to me that a conversation about economics is keeping them awake." So with that in mind, I'm going to speak about economics and hope you don't fall asleep. I'm here, first let me tell you a little bit about PJM, for those of you that don't know. PJM is the largest electricity market in the world, serves about a footprint that covers about 51 million people, about 20% of the U.S. electricity consumption. Just to put it in perspective, the peak demand in PJM's grid that we operate was almost 145,000 megawatts last summer. The next largest grid in the world is EDF in France at only about 85 gigawatts. So pretty large footprint, lots of potential impact as the markets evolve, and we're going to talk about the renewable component to this. PJM really thinks about renewables along with the rest of the resources in the grid with the mantra that price matters. Ultimately, price signals are what's going to drive significant shifts in economic behavior. And PJM's market is really designed to try and balance price signals at the end of the day. And the question is, what price signals are we going to see? We've heard some of the things the government can do to impact price signals. Ultimately, PJM is in the middle of all these transactions, trying to send signals about what resources are going to get used. And most recently, we've had a lot of discussion about trying to manage demand. And from PJM's perspective, demand management is the first and lowest hanging fruit on dealing with the environmental effects of the electricity marketplace and the electricity consumption. So a lot of the effort we've placed recently has been to actually deal with demand management, and it's really peak demand management. There was a question raised earlier today about how do you think about efficiency versus peak management, and really they fit nicely into the model, the model for electricity planning, which is efficiency looks very much like baseload. You create efficiency that's around all of the time, and it effectively reduces your need for baseload generation. Peak management looks very much like peaking generation. It's available for short periods of time as needed to increase the overall capacity factor or efficiency of the rest of the resources you utilize. So PJM sits in the middle of all of these resources, trying to balance prices, make sure that the signals, the prices are reflective of the relative demand for the resources. So what's going on right now? The question was posed, renewable resources for 2007. Well, 2007 really is for PJM the year to get past demand response programs and get to full market integration. Right now, PJM has all of the pieces in place to allow all loads to respond to price anytime they want. We're seeing new and interesting ways to automate. We heard from our friends at EPRI the initiative they're about to launch, new kinds of automation. This is the kind of thing integrated with price signals from centralized markets like PJM that can ultimately drive huge shifts in the efficiency of the grid. Just as a demonstrative statistic about the potential benefits here from an environmental perspective, if you look at the period in PJM last summer when we set our peak demand of almost 145,000 megawatts, there was actually voluntary customer load reductions, not because they were happy to do it, but because they were getting paid to do it because the price signals were being transmitted to them. The voluntary load reductions equate to, and these are not additive to one another, but these are indicative of about almost 1,400 tons of coal not being burned, or about 16,000 barrels of oil not being burned, or 230,000 MCF of natural gas. That's a lot of fuel. It's not a lot of fuel in the grand scheme of things, but as these automation tools, as these things emerge, at the end of the day, it's going to get bigger, and that's really where PJM sees things going for demand side in the long run. And more automation, better price signals, more transparency in the long run drives the environmental benefits. Where do we see the challenges? We need new metering infrastructure that will replace, in many cases, meters that Thomas Edison would recognize. It's an interesting fact that many places we're still putting in meters that don't do anything more than look like an odometer. We need more timely access to the data that's produced. One of the interesting nuances is that generally in the U.S. we don't measure demand on the same basis that we measure supply. There's almost no other commodity industry in the world that does that. The problem with that is that you can't then trade them off. They aren't fungible with one another. More economics, if you have commodities that are fungible with one another, people will make economic decisions of how to balance them. We heard earlier from the gas industry about the removal of disincentives for distribution companies to get involved in this. These are folks that talk to end users all the time, but yet generally today they have revenue structures that are designed to disincent their behavior to encourage demand management. And then there's all sorts of cost-enabling technologies. We've heard a lot about them today. And the other interesting thing is that historically, energy efficiency programs in most parts of the U.S. have been thought of not as a form of demand response. And the reason that we need to change the thinking on this is that they don't necessarily look at prices in markets to drive the efficiency decision. The market prices, as they emerge and as they become more transparent, can really help folks understand what's the benefits. And in many cases, the benefits are a slam dunk, and that's why we think people need to think about this on different terms. So now let's talk more directly about what people generally think of as renewables. In PJM, there's been a great deal of activity, lots of renewable portfolio standards in the mid-Atlantic part of PJM. The legislation in various states or regulation in various states is driving us towards substantial increases in various types of renewable resources. There's the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that covers the part of the PJM footprint on the East Coast. These are trends that are going to continue to move us towards more renewable resources, although as someone said earlier, this is not a standalone. There is emerging need for new resources from all types of sources, not just renewable. Just to give you an idea of where things are headed in PJM on a numbers basis, right now we have about 365 megawatts of wind, 215 kilowatts of solar. I know that doesn't sound a lot, but it's more than we've had in the past. We're actually getting a lot of activity in landfill gas. So this is the emergence of new opportunities. Again, price signals telling folks where and when to invest. A lot of stuff under construction and even under development. The wind numbers are reflective of what we've heard earlier. We're hopeful we get a lot of that built, but obviously you don't know until someone's put some iron in the ground whether the wind is going to get built. But one of the nice things about a centralized market, particularly for wind, is you get the price signals, you get the transparency, but you also get the ability to manage the variability of wind across a broad diversity of load. One of the knocks against wind over time in many different parts of the U.S., particularly when you have a very isolated utility, is that they can't manage the variability of wind. You don't know when the wind's going to blow. You have to keep all these resources on standby in order to balance when the wind dies down. When you have a very large grid that's centrally managed, the variability of wind to some degree actually balances itself, but it also is balanced against load variability and against other generating resources on a diverse set. So integrating into a large system actually really creates new opportunities for wind so that you don't have to have some of the disincenting charges that wind historically faced. PJM doesn't have any. In fact, we have some of the most progressive opportunities for wind. And lastly, we've got this thing we